So I've been saying this for the past few months. It's a schus and a privilege and a pleasure to be together with you all. And it has become routine. And I don't know whether when the COVID will be over, whether we'll be able to be mevatel this minag. So Baruch Hashem, we are approaching Rosh Hashanah, and we all are feeling Emas Yoim Hadin. So we're looking for schusim. And on my list of zechuyos for Rosh Hashanah Tovshin Pei Aleph, a prominent place is reserved for the Archikala of Agidas Yisrael in America. It's a schus once again to teach Torah, to be Marbitz Torah, and to be together with all of you. So our previous year I was Mamish Holche Drochim, and we spoke about Mitzvah Sukkah, and today I was asked to address Tkias Shofar. So b'yesod hadvarim, the mitzvah of Tkias Shofar, how do we define this mitzvah? Is it Tkias Shofar, or rather Shmias Koil Shofar? If we assume the mitzvah is Shmias Koil Shofar, then it's poshut each and every one of us is makayim the mitzvah on his own when he listens and hears Koil Shofar. But if we define the mitzvah as Tkias Shofar, it is only very few that are Tekeya. In every Kela there is one Baal Tekeya. How are all the others Makayim the mitzvah? We will need to assume that Shomea Koina. So the source of the mitzvah of the halacha of Shomea Koina is in Sukkot Daf Lamed Ches. And Chazal learned this from a posuk in Novi. It said, Vorah ma shekoro hamelech. And it wasn't the Melech that read the Sefer, but rather it was read before him. Mikan sheshomea koina b'kol makom. Would we say that the same refers to Tkias Shofar as well? The Avnei Nez and two different sources. Orach Chaim Siman Tov Lamed Aleph and Avnei Nez Shemishpat Siman Samachay argues we don't find Shomea koina only with words, with content. When you listen to a bracha, to a kriya, to a tefillah, which these are based on content, on words, we say Shomea Koina. But this doesn't refer to Kol Shofar, which is merely a koil, a voice. Well, the Avnei Nez is the Ilui, and he has a valid argument. But if we assume the mitzvah is Shmiya, and in a very short while we will see, yes, that is Pashtas Halacha, the mitzvah is Shmiya and not Tekiya, then okay, then we don't need to assume Shomea Koina. But if we assume that the mitzvah is Tekiya, and this is also a valid opinion of some of the greatest Rishonim, no other way to go about it. We must assume that just as we say a Shomea Koina by Brochas and by Kriyas and by Tfilas, we also say Shomea Kitoikeya. And we already find this concept in one of the great Rishonim, Mordechai, Rosh Hashanah, Siman Tov Shin Chof Aleph. Just like we say Shomea Koina, we also say Shomea Kitoikeya. Maybe we would say Shlicha Shel Adam Kamoisei. No, in no way. I don't want to delve into the depths of the sugya of shlichus. We previously spoke about this ba'arichas gedola in one of the previous Yerach Kalas in Yerushalayim, and I think we went over this sugya again in one of our previous virtual Yerach Kalas shiurim. So I made it very clear. Mitzvahs that are essentially avodas Hashem, not about the result, but actually about the actual deed. And Maisa, Shlichus doesn't apply. So we definitely cannot say that the Baal Tekei is mostly all the others midin Shlichus. If it would be din Shlichus, why do we need to hear at all? So if the mitzvah is Tekiya, we need to assume that כשם שאומרו שומע כעינה, כך אומרו השומע כתוקע. So how do we define this mitzvah? Obviously, it's a machlokes in Rishonim. The Rambam, 7 different sources in the Rambam. The Rambam goes over this, he cites 7 times. Sefer HaMitzvahs, HaOroch v'HaKotzor. So we have Sefer HaMitzvahs, which is a Sefer B'fnei Atzma, and we have Minyan HaMitzvahs, defined by the Rambam as Sefer HaMitzvahs HaKotzor, which is an integral part of Mishnah Torah. Both in the Orech and the Kotzor, mitzvah kuf ayin, mitzvah say kuf ayin, the Rambam clearly says the mitzvah is l'shmaya koil shofar. Prote ha-mitzvahs in the beginning of Hilchos Shofar. The Rambam, in the beginning of every Sefer and every Kovetz in Mishnah Torah, the Rambam briefly mentions and enumerates which of the mitzvahs are saying loises will be discussed and elaborated in these halachas. So the Rambam once again in Prote HaMitzvahs writes, mitzvah l'shmoya koil shofar. In 3 different halachas in Hilchos Shofar, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, Halacha Gimel, Perek Beis, Halacha Aleph, the Rambam once again clearly says the mitzvah is shmir. And the Rambam actually explains a halacha. Because the mitzvah is not the tkiya, but rather the shmiya, but ein bekoil din gzeila. So the Rambam explains if the mitzvah would be tkiya, then you cannot be yaitzel with a shofar gozel, because that would be a mitzvah b'avero. But because the mitzvah is shmiya, kol malav hareach ein behem mishum me'ila, gam gzeila ein behem, and that is why a person is yaitzel with the shofar gozel. So twice in Sefer HaMitzvahs, once in Prote HaMitzvahs, 3 different halachas in Mishnah Torah. Number 7 is in Shuvas Pe'er Ador, Simen Nun Aleph. The Tur follows in the footsteps of the Rambam, and that is why the Tur explains this in the Tov Kuf Pei that the Nusach HaBrocha is Asher Kedushono B'Mitzvos Tzivonu L'Shmaya Kol Shofar. We don't say the Brocha Litkaya B'Shofar because the mitzvah isn't the Tkiyah, but rather Shmiyah. And that is why the Nusach HaBrocha reflects the essence of the mitzvah. And we say, Asher Kedushono b'mitzvos v'tzivono l'shmoya koil shofar. Beis Yosef follows in the footsteps of the Tur and the Rambam. But the Rabbeinu Tam is a different opinion. And Rabbeinu Tam is quoted in the Rosh. Sechet Rosh Hashanah, Perek Daled, Simen Yud. Sefer HaPardes, Talmidei Rashi. According to the Rabbeinu Tam, the Nusach of the Brocha is Asher Kedushono b'mitzvos v'tzivono al tkiyas shofar. If we assume, and justly so, rightfully so, that the Brocha reflects the essence of the mitzvah, and this assumption is based on a Gemara in Shabbos Daf Chov Gimel. The Gemara is Mesupik regarding Ner Chanukah, Ad lo ka'isa mitzvah or ano ka'isa mitzvah. And the Gemara proves Ad lo ka'isa mitzvah because the Nusach HaBrocha is Asher Kedushono b'mitzvos v'tzivono lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. If we say lahadlik, then that would prove that the mitzvah is hadlok of ad lo ka'isa mitzvah. So based on this fundamental assumption, which is a Gemara Meforeshes, if Rabbeinu Tam says we say the Brocha al tkiyas shofar, that would prove that the mitzvah is tkiyah and not shemiyah. It is also obviously the opinion of the Smag Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol, one of the great Balei HaTaisvis, Mitzvahs Asay Membeis, and a Sheilta the Rav Achai Goin, Sheilta Kuf Ayin Aleph, Pashtus Rishonim, the mitzvah is Litkoya B'Shofar. So whenever we have a suffix, or even a machlokes and Rishonim, we go back to the Gemara and try to prove from the Sugyas Hashas, Mishnah Gemara, how would we define the mitzvah of shofar? And there seems to be contradictory sugyas. Some sugyas point to the conclusion that the mitzvah is shmiyah, while others would prove that the mitzvah is tkiyah. And I dealt with the Sugi Minchas Osha Moyadim Chelek Aleph. But in the shir I'm giving you today, there are many sources which I became aware of after the Sefer was published. So Yoisem Amasha Kosov Khan, Hareini Oimar Lefenechem. Rosh Hashanah Daf Chav Zayin Atokei Latoy Chaboyo Chav Zayin Omid Beis Lo Yotzi Yedei Chivosei. And the Gemara's Machalaki depends. Those are people that stand in the bar Yoitze because they hear a Kol Shofar, but those that are standing outside the bar are not Yoitze because they only hear a Kol HaVorah. Last week I wrote a tshuva. Is it okay to cover the Pi HaShofar, the broad end of the shofar, where the Kol Shofar comes out? So in this period of COVID-19, maybe that many doctors and lay people are concerned. The primary source of infection and the way this disease is transmitted from one person to another is by saliva droplets that we all dispense and disperse. When you sneeze, when you cough, when you shout, and even when you talk, you are releasing into the open air tens of thousands of microscopic droplets of saliva, and those droplets carry the virus. And that is why we wear masks. So when you blow the shofar, and you blow with all your force, and every Baltikaya knows that the shofar, it's wet, the inside of the shofar, from the saliva of the Baltikaya. And sometimes you see a Baltikaya middle of the Kifas turning over his shofar and pounding on his palm to get some of the moisture out. So we could assume that when you blow the shofar, you are dispensing or dispersing so much droplets. And they're going up. And by basic physical laws, what goes up must come down. And probably those droplets will be dispersed in a greater area. So many of the Bonim and communities throughout the world turn to me, could we cover the shofar? And my conclusion is, yes, you can. So in the tshuva that I wrote, it definitely is b'shas adchak. I definitely would not recommend doing so under normal circumstances. But if we are concerned, I think it is permissible. And I wrote a tshuva about this, and if any one of you is interested to see the tshuva, once again, you could turn to my dear friend Rabbi Gottesman, and I will make it available. So with that tshuva, I discussed the concept of what is Kol HaVorah. It's not clear what is Kol HaVorah. But anyway, the Gemara says, people that are standing in the bar could be Yoitze because they hear Kol Shofar, but those that are standing outside the cave, they hear Kol HaVorah, and therefore they're not Yoitze. And the Gemara makes it clear. If the Baltikei is standing outside the cave, but he's blowing into the cave, obviously he has a Taimani Shofar. So in many Taimani communities, they don't use a ram's horn, but rather a long, beautiful spiral horn, which comes from the greater kudu, which is an African antelope. And it was always a Taima B'Yenai, because the Taimana followed the ruins of the Rambam, the Piskei Rambam, and according to the Rambam, Shofar Shalayim is Miyakev. According to most of the Shonim, it's only a Lachatchila. So how do the Taimanim use a shofar that is not from an isle? So I wrote extensively about this. Once again, it's not the topic. It's not our focus today. But obviously, the Baltikei had a long Taimani shofar. He was standing outside the bar, and the koil is Yoitze b'toich bar. The Gemara says, even the Tekiah is not Yoitze. If the mitzvah is Tekiah, why isn't he Yoitze? After all, he was Tekiah. All the others that are not Tekiah, they need to hear. Because the way their Yoitze is Shomea Ka'oin, Shomea Ketekiah. But the Baltikei himself, he blew the shofar, so he doesn't need Shomea. So why would it make a difference whether he hears Kol Shofar or Kol HaVorah? Why would it make a difference whether he hears at all? He was Tekiah and the mitzvah is Tekiah. So this sugya would prove that the mitzvah is not tkiya but shmiya. And therefore there's no difference between the Dal Tekeh and all the others. You need to hear kol shofar. And if you didn't hear kol shofar, but rather kol havara, lo yotzi yedei chavosai. Whether you blew or not. So this sugya tkiat terchabor would prove the mitzvah shmiya, not tkiya. But of Chav Tesam and Aleph, we find another sugya. Because you need to hear from a Bar Chiyuva. If we assume the mitzvah is tkiya, then the Baal Tekeh needs to be moitzi all the others yedei chayvosam. And as in all the other halachas, when a person is moitzi chaveroi, you need to hear from a Bar Chiyuva. You need to be a Bar Chiyuva to be moitzi others. But if the mitzvah is shmiya, then each and every individual is makayim the mitzvah on his own when he hears kol shofar. So why is it important to hear from a bar chiyuv? This would prove that the mitzvah is tkiya and not shemiya. So there would be a stira between Daf Chav Zayin and Daf Chav Tes. Some of the Achronim deal with this question. Some of them reach the conclusion that we must assume the mitzvah is both tkiya and shemiya. And you're not yoitz unless you have both tkiya and shemiya. And that would reconcile, that would be miyashav the stira between these two sugyas. On one hand, you need to hear from a bar chiyuva because you need the tkiya. On the other hand, tkiya terchabor is not yoitz because you need shemiya as well. That is the conclusion of Maram ben Chaviv, and I'm quoting Achronim in the chronological order. Maram ben Chaviv, in Sefer Yoim Teruah, Daf Chav Tes, Shagas Aryeh Siman Vav, Minchas Chinuch, Mitzvah Tov Hei. That is the mitzvah of shofar. But this is totally unreasonable. The Lashon HaRambam. The Rambam clearly says the mitzvah is shmiya and not tekiya. And that is why you're yoitza with the shofar agazul. If we need tekiya as well, you cannot be yoitza b'shofar agazul. And the Tur, following the footsteps of the Rambam, Tov Kuf Pei Hei, and the same goes for the B'S Yosef. The Tur clearly says, Eina mitzvah elo b'shmiya v'loi b'tekiya, and that is why we say the bracha l'shmaya kol shofar. So this conclusion might be a logical conclusion to be miyashav the stira between two sugis, but it's totally unacceptable the divrei HaRambam, HaTur, v'B'S Yosef. So we need to search for other explanations. So on one hand, regarding the sugya of Tkiat Terchabor, Maram al-Shikar, one of the Rishonim in Siman Vav, deals with this question and he argues, the mitzvah might be tekiya, but there is a condition, tzorach lashmiya la'aznav, which brings us to machlokes in the Mishnah of Yosi b'Chachamim, Brachas Daf Tes Vav, regarding all the mitzvahs shebedibur. Is it sufficient? Is it enough? Tzorach lashmiya la'aznav, tzorach loitzi b'sfosav, or is it required? Tzorach lashmiya la'aznav. The halacha is tzorach loitzi b'sfosav, but ain't tzorach lashmiya la'aznav. The loy Rabbi Yosi. But we do find a concept regarding Kriya Shema. And in Kriya Shema, it's clear that the mitzvah is v'dibartu bam. It's not shmiya, it's dibur. But nevertheless, Rabbi Yosi argues, Shema. Shema means tzorach lashmiya la'aznav. So we do find a mitzvah that is v'dibur, but it has a condition that you need to hear as well. So the Maram al-Shikar argues, maybe the mitzvah would be tekiya, but you need to hear as well. And that is why Tkiat Terchabor lo yotzi dechavose, because he didn't hear kol shofar, but rather kol havara. Reasonable. Misyashav alaleiv. So that would be miyashav Rabbeinu Tam from the sugya of Tkiat Terchabor. How are we miyashav the Rambam from the sugya of Bar Chiyuva? if the mitzvah is shmiyah, lמצות שהתוקע אינו מוציא אחרים מידי חבוסם. So why do we need to hear from a bar chiyuva? Chazon Ish Simach Tes. In the Kuntras on Shomea Koine. It's a magnificent Kuntras. Unique in the Chazon Ish. Different in style and in form. So the Chazon Ish argues, the mitzvah might be shmiyah, but once again, there's a condition you need to hear a kol shofar shel mitzvah. And we cannot define the kol shofar as a kol shofar shel mitzvah if the one that blows and creates that kol shofar is not a bar chiyuva at all. And therefore, you need to hear from a bar chiyuva. But there are two different sugyas which make matters more complicated. And both these sugyas are once again Daf Chof Tes Omed Aleph. So the Gemara says Daf Chof Tes regarding Tkiya Shofar Tzorech Kavonas Shomea veKavonas Mashmiya. It is not only that you need to hear from a bar chiyuva, you need Kavonas Shomea. He needs to be Mechavan and say Sidei Choyvam. And that is because Mitzvah Sichas Kavanah. But we also need Kavonas Mashmiya. And the one that is Tokeh B'Shofar needs to be Mechavan Lahoitzi Es HaShomeya Yedei Chavosai. And now the question is obvious. If the mitzvah is Shmiya, and each person is Yotze on his own, so why do we need Kavonas Mashmiya? The Chazon Ish, stretching his first argument that we mentioned just a few minutes ago, you need to hear from a bar chiyuva because otherwise it's not a kol shofar shel mitzvah. So the Chazon Ish argues, if there is no kavonas mashmiya, it's a kol shofar shel mitzvah for him, but it's not a kol shofar shel mitzvah for me. But Aniyas Daiti, this is going too far. Too far. I could accept this svara. If the one that blows the shofar is not a bar chiyuva, then it's not a kol shofar shel mitzvah. But if he is a bar chiyuva and he's mechaven to be yotze himself, then that is a kol shofar shel mitzvah. So why can't I be yotze when I hear a kol shofar shel mitzvah? Why do I need him to be moitzi me? Why do I need his kavana to be moitzi me if he actually is not moitzi me? I'm yotze, but it's a mashmiya. And it is a kol shofar shel mitzvah because he has tekiat l'shem mitzvah shofar and he's tekiat to be yotze himself. Difficult for me to accept the dakus, the svara, that it's not considered a kol shofar shel mitzvah regarding the shomeya unless there's kavonas mashmiya. I think there must be another way to understand the sugi according to the Rambam. On the other hand, there's another sugya which seems to support the Rambam that the mitzvah shmiya not tkiya. Chotzi evet chotzi ben choyren eine moitzi acherim dechavosam, and he cannot even be moitzi himself. So chotzi evet chotzi ben choyren tzad cherus is chayev mishoifa, tzad avdus is poter mishoifa, because evet chayev b'mitzvahs ki'isha. And it's a mitzvah to say Shazman Groma. Noshim are potter from Tkiya Shofar. They are exempt. Rabbi Kiveg is the only one. In the Mafteches and HaEysonim and Siman Aleph Chuvas Rabbi Kiveg, Rabbi Kiva argues Shavi Olei Choiva. But even to Rabbi Kiveg, that's just Medin Neder. Noshim are potter with Tkiya Shofar, bearing in mind that it's a mitzvah to say Shazman Groma. So Chotzi Evet Chotzi Mechoyren only has half of a Chiyuv. And therefore he cannot be a moitzi acherim. He cannot be moitzi zatzmoi because lo yoset tzad avdus v'mapek tzad cherus. And the question arises: why do we find this halacha of chotzi evet chotzi ben choyren cannot be yotze, cannot be moitzi zatzmoi only regarding tkiyas shofar? There are many mitzvahs shebedibur which are Zman Groma and Noshim are Potur. Could you recall some of them? I'm giving you a test. Kriya Shema. Noshim Pturas me Kriya Shema. It's a mitzvah sessions mangrama. So why don't we find in Mishnah, in Weiss, in Gemara, in Bavli, in Yerushalmi, what does a Chotzi Evet Chotzi Mechorin do regarding Kriya Shema? How will he be Yoitze? Eino Moitzi Esatzmai. So he needs to hear from another one that is Kol Kulei Chiyuv. So why don't we find this halacha regarding Kriya Shema only regarding Shofar? And how about Berchas HaMozon? It's a boya de leiv shetem brochas tachaf, or the noshim archayev or potter beberchas HaMozon, and it's a suffix. So an issue cannot be moitzi ish. So why don't Chazal discuss the question of chotzi evet chotzi mechorin regarding berchas HaMozon? Sviras uoima. Tov peites mogen Avraham noshim arpotter mesviras uoima. It's a mitzvah seishas man grama. So how about chotzi evet chotzi mechorin regarding sviras uoima? Aloi davaru, that neither in Mishnah or in Weiss, in Bavli Yerushalmi, in Rambam, and in Shulchan Aruch, we do not find the question of Chotzi Evet Chotzi Menchorin neither by Berchas HaMozon, nor by Kriya Shema, nor by Svias Roima, only by Tkias Shofar. This demands an explanation. Minchas Chinuch. Any of you that are familiar with the Minchas Chinuch should know that he's very fond of Chotzi Evet Chotzi Menchorin, and in many mitzvahs, he asks the question, what is the din Chotzi Evet Chotzi Menchorin? So the Minchas Chinuch assumes in three different sources, Shin, Vav, Tov, Hey, Tov, Lamed, that the same halacha applies to Berchas HaMozon, to Kriya Shema, to Svias Roima, all the other mitzvahs that Noshim are potu. It's hard for me to agree with the Minchas Chinuch. Many times I quote the Chazon Ish Shviyas in Zion. Stimas HaRashonim, Stimas HaRashonim. Zu etzli ha'achocha HaEysonim kol harayos. There must be a reason that we do not find this halacha neither in Mishnah nor in Gemara. As I mentioned before, Bavli Yerushalmi, Rambam, Tur, Shulchan Aruch, only at Tkias Shofar. I recently saw three different shuvas in Radbaz, which I'm taken aback. The Radbaz clearly says the same as the Minchas Chinuch. So 300 years separate the Radbaz from the Minchas Chinuch. And the Radbaz Chelek Aleph Tafshin Pei Aleph, Tov Hey, Chelek HaEysonim Elef Tov Yud Zayin. The Radbaz clearly says that the same halacha Chotzi Evet Chotzi Menchorin applies to all the mitzvahs as leishas man groma, mitzvahs shebedibur. But I still think Offer ve'efer ani tachas kapes regleim. I cannot be cholek on the Radbaz lahalacha. But I learned this. Yes, it's legitimate. I still think that the fact we don't find this halacha, and I don't need to go through the list again. I mentioned it twice. Lani is daiti. This halacha doesn't apply only to Tkias Shofar. How do we understand it? I think it's very poshut. Lo kedivra Radbaz, lo kedivra Minchas Chinuch. So let me say a joke. Milsa de Bichusa. Just l'sabaris loizen, v'liyashiv is a devorim ala leiv. First day Yom Tov Sukkos, everybody proudly comes into the shul with this beautiful esligim, beautiful dalad mina manas lulav. And amongst all the others, person comes in and he has a tiny miniature lulav, two tfochim. That's about 20 centimeters. So a person walks over to him and he says, I don't want to embarrass you, but I just want to save you from a greater embarrassment. You probably don't know that the sheer lulav is dalet tfochim. The minimal sheer is 4 tfochim. So put away your lulav and I'll try to get you another one. And the person says, no, you don't get it. I'm a Talmud Chochem. I know the halachas, but I am a chotzi evet, chotzi ben chayrim. So I only have half of the mitzvah. You need dalet tefachim. But to me, as a chotzi evet, chotzi ben chayrim, 2 tefachim would be enough. I don't see your faces, but I assume that many of you are smiling or slightly laughing. It's ridiculous, you say to yourselves. And I say, why is it ridiculous? It is ridiculous, doesn't make sense, because Chotzi Evet, Chotzi Ben Chayrin only has 50% of the chiyuv. But the chefze the mitzvah needs to be a proper chefze the mitzvah. And he needs a kosher lulav. So when a Chotzi Evet, Chotzi Ben Chayrin wants to be Makayim mitzvah sukkah, I'm not talking about the first night. First night, even Noshim are chayiv. Tesvov, Mechaga, Matzos. But the other days, Chotzi Evet, Chotzi Ben Chayrin, could he eat a Chotzi Zayis? Of course not. The shiurim are the same. The 50% of you that needs to be Makayim the mitzvah needs to be Makayim the mitzvah with a proper lulav and a proper esrig. Would we say that the sukkah of a Chotzi Evet, Chotzi Ben Chayrin, it's enough if the mechitzas are 5 tefachim? We all know that doifan sukkah needs to be 10 tefachim high. But if he only has 50% of the chiyuv, maybe his mechitzas are 5 tefachim. Ridiculous. You need a kosher sukkah. You need to eat a kazayis pas. You need a proper kosher lulav. So let me say this. Kechiyuvoy kach kiyumoy. Berchas HaMazon, Kriyas Shema, Sfiras Wayna, Kechiyuvoy kach kiyumoy. His chiyuv is a partial chiyuv, his kiyum is a partial kiyum. So, moitzi es atzmoy. He benches for himself, he counts Sfira for himself, he has Koira Kriya Shema for himself, and that's okay. Tkiya Shofar is different. Because the mitzvah is Shemiyah. The Koil Shofar is a chef to the mitzvah. The Koil Shofar is like his esrig, his lulav, his sukkah. He needs to hear a proper Koil Shofar. The Koil Shofar that he hears needs to be a full Kol Shofar Shal Mitzvah, because that's the Chefza. And the Kiyam, the Mitzvah, is the Shmir. Lishmoya Koil Shofar. And this sugya proves that the Rambam is right. The Mitzvah is Shmir, not Tkiya. If the Mitzvah would be Tkiya, then he would be Tkiya La'atzmai, like he's Koira Kriya Shema La'atzmai, like he benches Li'atzmai, like he counts Sfira Li'atzmai, and he doesn't have a problem. Because Kichiyuvoi kach kiyumoi. Chiyuv and kiyum come together. Tkiya Shofar is different because the mitzvah is Litkoya, Koil, Lishmoya, Koil Shofar. He needs to hear a proper Koil Shofar. Like he needs to be noitel a proper lulav. And he needs to eat a proper kazayas in the sukkah. And he needs a sukkah that has proper mechitzas. So he needs to hear a koil shofar shekol kuloi chiyuv. And that proves that the mitzvah of shofar is shmiyah and not tekiah. So once again, we are left with a contradiction between 2 sugyas. It is not only tekiah toichabor v'bar chiyuv, which we reconciled. It is the 2 other sugyas that are more problematic. Kavonas Mashmiya, which proves Tekiya, Chotzi Evet, Chotzi Ben Chayrin, which proves Shmiya. So I want to share with you a gewaldige chiddush. I think it's emes lamita, and it's the way I understand the sugyas. Kol hanachonim holchim al hayam. And I want to differentiate between Ma'aseh mitzvah and Mahus HaMitzvah. And in certain different sugyas, I think there's a difference between mahus ha-mitzvah, the essence of the mitzvah, and the actual act and deed that we need to perform. So let me give it to you, b'kitzur nimratz. Tkiya is the ma'isa mitzvah. Shmiya is the essence, the mahus, the ikar mitzvah. As if the Torah says to each and every one of us, titka'u kidei shetishma'u. I feel this chiddush so strongly. It's kol kach mesyashav al halev, but I always like to find a source. Because when I go against so many achronim, I always feel more comfortable if I have a source. I do. In Shuvas HaTashbetz. So the Tashbetz comes before the Radbaz. Shuvas HaTashbetz Chelik Beis and Akuf Tzadik Zayin. I'm just quoting the Loshen of the Tashbetz. Omro ha'halacha hakal chayovim b'tkiyas shofar. So the Tashbetz is somewhat troubled. In the mitzvah is shmiyah. Why do Chazal say hakal chayovim b'tkiyas shofar and not hakal chayovim l'shmoya kol shofar? So the Tashbetz explains. Hakal chayovim b'tkiyas shofar emes amru lefi she'i efshel l'shmiyah b'loi tkiyah. There cannot be shmiyah without tkiyah. V'hakal chayovim b'tkiyah kedei sheyishma'u hakol. Hakol chayovim b'tkiyah kedei sheyishma'u hakol. Ki efshel l'shmiyah b'lo tkiyah. So let me give you my argument. We could use two different definitions, hagdoras. And I love hagdoras. I think everything starts with a fundamental hagdorah, with a fundamental definition of every mitzvah, of every halacha, of every yesod. So in many areas, we differentiate between pa'il and savil. In English, active and passive. Between the cause and effect. Between the action and the result. Any mitzvah in which the essence of the mitzvah is passive. It's not a ma'isa. It's a result. It's the effect. It is a deed which is passive and not active. And the cause to the effect, the action that brings the result, that is the ma'isa mitzvah. Even though the essence, the ikar, the mahusa mitzvah is the result, but the ma'isa mitzvah is always the action and the deed which brings forth the result. And that is oine kidishme divrei hatashbetz I efshel l'shmiya b'loi tkiyah. There could never be shmiyas kol shofar without tkiyah. And therefore, tkiyas shofar is the ma'isa mitzvah. Shmiyas kol shofar is the mahus, the ikar mitzvah. I want to make another point. Not always would I say that if the ikar mitzvah is passive, then the active deed is defined as the ma'isa mitzvah. It still could be defined as hechsher mitzvah belvad. But when the cause and the effect must be at the very same time, the very same split second they come together, we cannot separate the cause from the effect. We cannot separate the action from the result. We cannot separate the active part from the passive one. They always are combined, two sides of the same coin. It is only then that we say that the ma'isa is not defined as hechsher mitzvah, but rather as ma'isa mitzvah. And you cannot blow shofar now and hear the call shofar tomorrow, or in an hour, or in a minute, or in another 5 seconds. The shmiya and the tkiya kuchim yorudu min hashamayim. and they always come together. That is why Tkiya Shofar is not defined as Hechsha Mitzvah Belvad, but rather Maisa Mitzvah. The Maisa and the Mahus are two different things, but they are combined, intertwined. They must come together. And in that case, the cause, the action is defined as a Maisa Mitzvah, not Hechsha Mitzvah. V'zeh kavonas atash beitz ef shel shmiya b'lo tkiya. Hakal chayovim b'tkiya kedei sheyishma'u hakol. So yes, the Rambam makes it very clear. There is no mitzvah bo b'aveda ki eina mitzvah ela b'shmiya b'lo b'tkiya. But nevertheless, we need the tkiya as well, and the tkiya is a Maisa Mitzvah, and that is why we need to hear from a Bar Chiyuva, and we need Kavonas Mashmiya. Hakal Chayovim B'Tkiya Kedei Sheyishma'u Hakol. And I want to bring another source. Just Liyashav Esadvora Malaleiv. And my other dogma is Mitzvah Tzitzis. It's fascinating. So there's a Toises in Yavamis Tzadikom in the base. Toises deals with the question, why is Kilayim Shatnez considered Kum Vasei? And when a person wears Dalat Kamfes Bloy Tzitzis, it's a Sheval Tais. So Toises says there is no mitzvah of Tzitzis, only La'achar Shu'u Lavush. The Maisa Lavisha, when a person puts on the beged of Dalat Kamfes, he's not chayav b'tzitzis yet. The chiyuv is chal only when he already is wearing the garment, the beged of Dalat Kamfes. The Isser of Klayim is lo silbash shatnez b'shas Lavisha. But the mashmoas of ksuscha means lavush kvar. That is Toises in Yavamis Tzadikom in base quoting the Ri, Mebalia Toises. Comes along the Shagas Ari and Simelamed base, and he has a gewaldige kash. Noam advorim lemisha amoron. From where do we know Esed Oichalois Esed, Kalayim Vitzitzis? But the most fundamental yesod in the sugi of Esed Oichalois Esed is Be'idne de Mesak Alav Mekayim Esed. You cannot be over on Alav now to be Mekayim and Esed La'achar Azman. It must be in the very same moment that you're Mavatal the Lav, you're Mekayim the Mitzvah Say. It is only then that we say Mitzvah Say Doche, Mitzvah Lotase. So the Shagas Ari argues and he asks, if you're over on Kalayim B'Shas HaLavisha and you're only Makayim Tzitzis La'achar HaLavisha, then it's not a Be'idna. So how could we say Aseh Doichalois Eseh? And the very source of Eseh Doichalois Eseh is Kalayim B'Tzitzis. And it contradicts the most fundamental Yesod in Eseh Doichalois Eseh. It's not Be'idna. So what's the teretz of the Shagas Ari? Well, the Shagas Ari doesn't have a problem. He doesn't need a teretz. He says, Toises isn't right. So the Shagas Ari was one of those very few achronim that didn't have a problem being choylek on Toises. Liboy hoyo kalev ha'ari. So the Shagas Ari, mekoyach this kasha. Reb Shlomo, is everything okay? Do you hear me?
Perfect.
So the Shagas Ari is choylek on Toises. It's not the way we learn. It's not the derech halimud that we received from Rabbi Seinu. When you have a kasha on Toises, we need to find a way to be miyasher divrei Toises. Shagas Ari kvoidoy b'makoyim emunach godoy maraban shemoy, one of the greatest achronim. But we have a problem. We have a kasha on the Toises. And I think the teretz is poshut biyoisa. The very same yesod that I say about tkiya shofar, I say about tzitzis. Because wearing a beged is passive, it's not active. It's the result. It's not the action. It's the effect, not the cause. And just like the Tashba says, "Ef shel shmi beloy tkiya, ef shel yoslovish beli levisha." You can't wear a garment unless you put on that garment, you or someone else. But wearing a garment is the result of putting on that garment. And therefore, levisha sebeged is the ma'isa mitzvah. Wearing dalet kanfis is the mahus hamitzvah. So, Tosis is right. You don't have a chiyuv till that garment is on your body. But putting on the ma'isa levisha is a ma'isa mitzvah. And when Chazal teaches us, say doicha loisa, say it is the ma'isa mitzvah that's doicha dalav, and not the mahus, not the kiyum, but rather the ma'isa. So I think there's a tzad shava between tzitzis and shofar. So the essence of mitzvah shofar is shmiyah, but the tkiya is not only hechsher mitzvah, it is ma'isa mitzvah. And just to quote the Tashbetz once again, hakol chayovim b'tkiya kedei sheyishma'u hakoil. So what is the machlekes Rabbeinu Tam and Rambam? This is the climax. This is my punchline. Rabbeinu Tam and Rambam have no machlekes regarding Tkiya Shofar. They have a machlekes regarding Birchas HaMitzvah. What is the relationship between Kiyum Mitzvah and Birchas HaMitzvah? Are Birchas HaMitzvahs formulated based on Mahus HaMitzvah or based on Ma'isa HaMitzvah? The Tur maintains that the Nusach HaBrocha should be L'Shmoya Kol Shofar because that's the essence of the mitzvah. That's the Mahus. Rabbeinu Tam maintains, no. What determines the Nusach HaBrocha is the Ma'isa. Lahadlik Ner Shel Chanukah. The Ma'isa mitzvah is the hadlaka. The mahus is pirsum enisa. So Rabbeinu Tam would prove his point from the very fundamental source in Shabbos Chof Gimel. Hadlaka is a mitzvah, lahadlik ner Chanukah, even though the essence of the mitzvah is pirsum enisa. So according to Rabbeinu Tam, what determines Nusach HaBrocha is the Ma'isa, not the mahus. While the Tur maintains, no, it is the Mahus HaMitzvah that will determine the Nusach HaBrocha. So this is the way I understand the essence of Mitzvah Shofar. And this Mahalach is miyash of all the stiras, Bein LeRabbeinu Tam veBein LeRambam. And the Machlokes of Rabbeinu Tam and the Rambam is actually not in the Mitzvah of Shofar, but rather in the Geder of Birchas HaMitzvah. Let me share with you a very short thought, after all, before Rosh Hashanah. Just a very short thought in Musar. So today's share was, how do we define Mitzvah Shofar, Tkiya or Shmiyah? I think in Pnimius, it is also both, a combination of the two. It is both Tkiya and Shmiyah. Why is that? We blow the Shofar for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We listen to the shofar for ourselves. On one hand, the Kodesh Baruch Hu says, "Imru lefona malchi yosh kedei shetamlachuni aleichem, imru lefona zachonis kedei sheyara zachonichem lefonai letoivo, ubemeh b'shofar." So we blow the shofar. The Kodesh Baruch Hu should listen to our shofar, and the shofar is mala zachonim shel Yisrael letoivo. There's another Ma'ameh Chazal, Rosh Hashanah Tezayin. Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, Tikol Lefonu B'Shofar Shalayim V'Nizkor Lachem Eloi Shel Yitzchak Ben Avraham. We blow the shofar, hoping HaKadosh Baruch Hu will listen to the shofar, and he will remember, okay, this Yitzchak. But it's not enough that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should listen to our shofar. We need to listen as well. We all remember the Rambam, Perek Gimel of Hilchos Tshuva. אף על פי שתקיע שופר בראש השונה, גזירת הכוסף רמז יש בו כלא יאמר, אורו ישנה משינaschem. And actually in the Rambam Frankel, we find two urus, uru, uru, as if the Rambam is speaking to us, and he's saying a drosha. Uru, uru yeshena mishinaschem ben ardoma makitzu v'taradim zichru b'rechem, chipsu b'masechem, v'chizru b'tshuva, elu ashoichechem es, v'emes b'hevel azman, v'shoigim kol shenosem b'hevel, v'rika shelo yoyel v'layatzel abitu lenafshei seichem. Heitivu drochechem v'maralechem v'yazav kolechon bekemes darkei hara. V'smachshavto yashaloi toiva. So the Rambam writes this halacha in Hilchos Tshuva, but it's amazing. The Ritva, Rosh Hashanah Dalet, argues, how do we know the Ikra mitzvah is Shmi and not Tkiya? So the Ritva says, because Ikra mitzvah Shofar is la'orer ha'levavos, to do tshuva. Amazing. It's not only a muzar thought, it's halacha. So the Ritva says the Ikra mitzvah Shofar is la'orer ha'levavos. So we blow for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That Shmi is called Shofar is for us. And the Shofar is a rallying call. It's an awakening call. Wake up from your slumber. Uru, uru yeshena mishinaskem v'nerdome makitzu metademaske. So what was my conclusion in today's shir? The Ikra mitzvah is Shmiya, Ma'isa mitzvah is Tkiya. So obviously the Ikra mitzvah is wake up. Wake up. Uru, uru yeshena mishinaskem. That's the Ikra mitzvah of Shofar. If we will listen to the Shofar, so will HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises, Ve'ani eska lachem Eloi shel Yitzchok ben Avraham ve'malani alechem ki akadetem es atzmachem. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises, if you will listen to the Shofar, so will I. Imru lefon ezechroinis kedei sheyala zechroinchem lefonai letoivo u'bemeh b'shofar. Let us hope and daven that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will listen to our shofar, and we will try as well to wake up and to come back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tichle shona v'kil lo yiseyo, v'achel shona v'birch yiseyo. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should take this pandemic away, and we should all share b'sayros toivos Yeshuas v'nachomis, and this coming year should be Shona Toiva Mesuka, and Shnasku Uli Yeshonu Lano Ula Kol Beis Yisrael. I would give